The Cold War camo so advanced it fooled the world for decades. In the frozen silence of Eastern Europe, entire squads could melt into the landscape, gone, invisible, erased by a fabric pattern so effective it was practically sorcery. No digital tricks, no futuristic nanotech, just cloth engineered through Cold War obsession and paranoia. This was a camouflage so revolutionary that even NATO analysts didn't know it existed until years after the Soviet Union collapsed. It wasn't just gear, it was science, woven with secrecy, strategy and survival. And for decades it was hidden in plain sight. After World War II, the art of camouflage transformed into a full-blown science. What had started as painted nets and leaf patterns turned into an arms race of optics, perception and material physics. The battlefield was no longer just trenches and forests. It was viewed from the sky, through reconnaissance lenses and early spy satellites. Visibility was vulnerability. Both NATO and the Warsaw Pact understood that in modern warfare, the one who blended best survived longest. While Western militaries were still fielding patterns like British DPM or the US frog skin, Soviet scientists were working on something radical. They weren't painting trees and blotches on fabric. They were studying how light behaves in nature. How bark diffuses shadows, how snow reflects glare, how the human brain identifies shapes in chaos. Out of these experiments came a pattern so unusual that it broke all design rules. This wasn't camouflage, as soldiers knew it. This was optical disruption. In Soviet research labs and test fields near Warsaw, engineers created what became known later to the West as KLMK camouflage. To the untrained eye, it looked plain, tan, pale green, a loose web of irregular mesh-like lines, almost boring. But when tested in the field, it was jaw-dropping. The genius lay in the way it interacted with light. The micro-pattern, tiny uneven cells and veins, created interference that disrupted the human outline at distances beyond 30 meters. Under the open sky, soldiers didn't vanish into darkness. They merged with light itself. The effect worked across multiple terrains, dense forests, tundra, even open steppe. By the late 1950s, elite Soviet reconnaissance units, Spetsnaz operators and CBRN, that's chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear, specialists were quietly equipped with these suits. Trials showed that under early infrared and thermal optics, KLMK uniforms even appeared cooler than their surroundings. That's right, cold spots on a heat-sensitive screen. The mesh weave trapped air, reducing body heat radiation while keeping soldiers surprisingly comfortable in swamps, forests or Arctic winds. While NATO was experimenting with thick, chemical-treated fabrics, the Soviets had stumbled onto something both elegant and scientific. A uniform that bent light and heat without adding weight or bulk. Unlike flashy parade uniforms or mass-issued fatigues, the KLMK never became standard issue. Only specialized units received them. Even most Warsaw Pact allies, East Germany, Czechoslovakia and Poland, saw only simplified variants during controlled tests. This wasn't just Soviet control freak behaviour, it was a deliberate strategic move. Camouflage is worthless once the enemy knows how it works. So the KLMK became a state secret, literally locked away from NATO eyes. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Western analysts documented thousands of Soviet equipment pieces through defectors and captured gear, but not this one. The KLMK stayed off intelligence lists. It wasn't until the late 1980s, near the end of the Cold War, that Western militaries even realized such a pattern existed. By then, it had already been in quiet use for over 2 decades. When the Soviet Union fell, declassified archives and recovered stockpiles stunned NATO researchers. They were looking at technology that was, honestly, decades ahead of its time. Fabric that anticipated digital camouflage long before the first pixelated patterns appeared in Western labs. Here's where it gets fascinating. What made KLMK work wasn't its colour. It was its contrast management. Most modern camouflage aims for complexity, bigger, busier, more detailed patterns. But the KLMK proved that, well, simplicity wins when it's scientifically tuned. The small-scale disruptions, those tiny random fractures of colour and shade, fooled the brain's pattern recognition far more effectively than large splotches. You can apply the same principle in real life. If you're designing outdoor gear or survival clothing, don't just match colours, manage contrast. Layer materials with slightly different tones and textures. For example, wearing a thin mesh or light netting over darker clothing can scatter light reflection, just like the Soviets did. When building a shelter, use mix materials. Burlap over tarp grass, woven into snow-sand-coloured dust, brushed across synthetic fabric. Nature doesn't do uniform surfaces, and that's why it hides everything so well. Testing this is easy. Move 50 to 100 metres away from your setup. Look again. Notice where light catches edges, where surfaces seem too smooth or bright. Adjust texture, not just colour. That's exactly how Cold War field researchers trained. They didn't trust theory, they trusted the forest. Once the KLMK was declassified, its influence rippled across global military design. Russia's later Berezka and partisan patterns were direct descendants. Germany's Flecktarn and even North American CADPAT and MARPAT patterns share its DNA in their use of micro-patterns and light disruption. Civilian manufacturers soon caught on. Outdoor gear, hunting clothing, and even sports apparel now use similar weaving principles. Tiny, light-diffusing meshes that reduce glare and regulate heat. What began as Cold War secrecy ended up shaping the entire modern outdoor industry. And the irony? The KLMK never sought attention. It wasn't flashy or cinematic. It was quiet, humble, and devastatingly effective, just like the soldiers who wore it. You know, the story of the KLMK isn't just about uniforms. It's about how innovation often hides in simplicity. In survival and concealment, it's not the most advanced gadget that saves you. It's understanding how light, texture and perception work together. Whether you're out in the wild designing tactical gear or studying military history, the lesson holds. Camouflage isn't about looking invisible. It's about breaking the rhythm the human brain expects to see. The KLMK mastered that rhythm decades before the world even knew it existed. For nearly 40 years, this Cold War camo remained a ghost, protecting soldiers who couldn't be seen and baffling analysts who couldn't believe what they weren't seeing. Today, its legacy continues, woven into every modern pattern that values science over spectacle. If this deep dive into Cold War innovation got your gears turning, hit that subscribe button for more stories that peel back the layers of history's most ingenious survival technologies. Share this with a fellow history buff or outdoor enthusiast, because sometimes the smartest tools are the ones that vanish before your eyes.